Remember Friday, December 21st, 2012, when people were saying the world was coming to an end? How disappointed I was to wake up on Saturday morning and find the planet still spinning. It did not come to an end, yet how many people there were who were terrified that it would. When does the end come? Well, the end of the world comes to me on that day when God calls me from this world to the next. And there's nothing to be afraid of in that. Martin Luther King tells us, "Our lives begin to end on that day when we become silent about the things that matter." How many people do we see whose lives have already begun to end because they are indeed silent about important things? It is the Spirit which fills and prompts us to open our mouths. The Spirit which prompts us to call out in a loud voice. Today we hear the story of two outstanding women, Elizabeth and Mary, meeting one another. We are told that Elizabeth was filled with the Spirit, and so she cried out in a loud voice. People filled with the Spirit always cry out. The Spirit always prompts us to open our mouth to cry out in praise of God, to open our mouth and cry out in support of the poor and the oppressed, to cry out against injustices, to cry out for reform. A Spirit-filled person crying out is known as a prophet. It may come as a surprise to learn that sacred Scripture makes no distinction between the ministry of prophet for men and for women. Elizabeth was not the first woman to be filled with the Spirit and cry out. She was neither the first nor the last woman prophet. On this day, when we hear the touching story of these two remarkable women, let us celebrate the women prophets of history. The Hebrew Scriptures are filled with descriptions and even names of some of the ancient prophets, and some of the big ones were women. We have Miriam, Deborah, Huldah, Noadiah. Miriam was not merely the first woman, but the first person given the name prophet. Deborah was the only person who simultaneously had the role of prophet, judge, poet, and military commander. Huldah was a very important woman, the first to confirm an archaeological discovery. When an ancient scroll was found, it was brought to her for approbation. Because of her prophetic ministry, that scroll became the basis for what later was to become a rather famous book known as the Bible. Anna was that old woman in the temple at the time when the parents of Jesus brought the child to the temple. She was the first human being prompted by the Spirit to cry out and proclaim that this was the long-awaited Redeemer. Elizabeth, filled with the Spirit, recognized Jesus even before he was born and prompted her to open her mouth and sing his praises. Mary Magdalene was the first person to proclaim the resurrection of Christ, so St. Augustine called her the apostle to the apostles. And there are Islamic scholars who regard Mary, the mother of Jesus, as a great prophet in her own right. Indeed, Mary was filled with the Spirit, who prompted her to open her mouth in that resounding yes, which changed the course of human history, and to burst forth into her beautiful song of praise, the Magnificat. In our own day, too, there are prophets. And as in every age, many of these are women. From the beginning of time, the powers that be have sought to silence their voices. Yet all throughout history, we have seen courageous, heroic women and men who, prompted by the Spirit, still dared to open their mouths. One such heroic woman of the 14th century challenges us. Cry out as if you had 1,000,000 voices, for it is silence which kills the world. Proclaim the truth, and do not be silent out of fear. That great prophet and mystic was St. Catherine of Siena. And cry out she did, rebuking in no uncertain terms the leaders of church and state. God always sends prophets, and society always tries to silence them, or worse. Let us dare to listen to the Spirit-filled prophets all around us, the women and men who dare to open their mouth and cry out. Human voices may be silenced, human lives snuffed out, but the Spirit can never be silenced. The Spirit will always find new instruments, new prophets through whom to speak. With Catherine, then, with Elizabeth, with Mary, with Deborah, with Anna, and with all those Spirit-filled men and women throughout the ages, cry out as if you had 1,000,000 voices, for it is silence which kills the world.